Okay.
Well,
Yes.
Yeah.
welcome. Okay, welcome everybody to T-Limbs Presents The Bridge. I'm Shante Wright, and I would like to introduce our distinguished panel that we have here. Of course, you have Francis over here, we have Teresa, and we have Twyla. We'd like to send a shout out to Reggie and Ron, our technical gurus that make this thing happen. So, Reg and Ron, we want to send you guys a high five. So, thank you guys for all that you do. Today we have a dynamic discussion concerning the missing conversations of MLK. And to lead us off, I'd like to start you off with our own Angela Davis, Sister Soldier, Michelle, Twyla.
Yes, I love that.
Roll into one.
Yes, yes.
Oh, can I ever live up to that? No. Thank you so much. First of all, we want you to hit the subscribe button. We want you to hit the like button. We want you to hit the share button. We want you to find us on connecttothebridge.com. We want you to go to Connect to the Bridge on YouTube or on Instagram, Connect to the Bridge, or Facebook, Connect to the Bridge. We're here every day or every Sunday from 4 to 5. Had a little technical delay. That was just for trying to knock out some glitches. So just ride it out with us. Don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere. Now.
We want to hear your comments. We want your input. This is for you. Again, I say put your brick into the foundation. You can call us at 240-719-2560. I made it. I had that written down. But okay. But we're rolling. But we do want to hear from you. We want to hear your comments. We want your input.
Yes.
You know, anything that you'd like to discuss or suggest a question, please hit us up. If you have something to say about the show or something that we can improve upon, let us know. We want your feedback because we can do this together.
Yes.
Very good. Let's dial back the pages of time to 1967. 1967, there was a whole lot going on in 67. The speech we're going to talk about today is called The Other America. It was delivered at Stanford University by Martin Luther King, and that was the speech that we believe that got him killed in 68. 67 King was what got 68 King killed. I think we can agree on that.
Yeah.
But what was happening in the world of 67? I know there was a whole lot going on in the United States. Well, we know we have 475,000 troops that were in Vietnam. We know that the president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, increased the taxes, 6% tax, to fund the war.
The fake war.
Well,
That was a fake war. I mean, that's even before Trump came on the scene, but the fake war. But
well, guess what? It never was actually declared a war. It's called the Vietnam conflict. Just like Korea.
Okay.
So, and there's different, and there is a technical difference
That's to
between calling
soften
something
it.
a war and calling it a conflict. You had gas was 33 cents a gallon. The pay per hour was $1.40 to get a new home. It cost you $3,800 or so. I think about it.
Cell phones were big as this book.
Disregard. You had so many different things. You had the Loving versus Virginia case, which the Supreme Court finally declared was unconstitutional to not allow interracial marriages. Later on that year, Thurgood Marshall was elected or selected as the first black Supreme Court justice, and in my opinion, the only black Supreme Court justice. Now, that's Twyla.
That's another story. But our current.
But at the same time, COINTELPRO legally got started, and it was the FBI's way of spying on what they considered, I'm going to use a quote here. He said, to neutralize black nationalist hate groups and to prevent the infiltration of militant groups. So the targets were the Revolutionary Action Movement, SNCC, SCLC, MLK, the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad, Stokely Carmichael, and a gentleman named Maxwell Stanford. So they said that the Black Panther Party was the greatest threat to the internal society of the country.
Let me jump in here right quick.
Jump.
J. Edgar Hoover, who was our leader of the FBI, they asked him, in his opinion, what was the greatest threat to the United States? And he said the unification of Black America.
Exactly.
Wow.
That's
Wow.
our leader of the FBI.
Wow.
That was the greatest threat to this country that we built. You understand? Thought I'd throw that in there. But go on.
But saying that the Black Panther Party was the greatest militant threat, that just pales in comparison, because on his list, nowhere was the KKK. Go figure.
I don't think they're on any terrorist list even today.
Even now.
Yeah.
Well, what's that new program? The EI?
BIE.
What is it called?
BIE.
The BIE, yeah.
Black Identity.
They're not even
Extremists.
on that. No skinheads or skullheads or bald heads or whatever they want to call themselves now, but they're not on. There's not a list of them, and anybody that protests the whims of the government is on this list.
Well, the funny thing is, the majority of the groups on this list are groups that either are not pro-democracy, more groups that lean towards socialism or communism, and even some Marxist approaches too. Because the one group that I found that was surprisingly was not on the list for COINTELPRO was when Caucasian folks asked Huey Newton, "What can we do to help you?" And he said, "Well, start a White Panther Party." And there was a White Panther Party. People don't know that. And it actually existed. And they were very far leaning left, especially after the Panthers changed their
Stance.
Right. So then instead of being a black national group, they were more a group inclusive, and it was more socialist about the common man being underneath the thumb of the oppressed governments.
Okay, so what my question to you is, I only heard recently that you said there were other speeches that Martin Luther King gave, which were not that I've got a dream, I have a dream speech, but the more powerful ones. There was a particular one that came after I have a dream speech.
Oh, there were several. There was because there was the March on Selma. So King was a preacher who had a church, so he was always, if you listen to him on Sunday, he was always from the pulpit. He was advocating from the pulpit. So there are lots of things that he might have said that we'll never know except for speaking to those that were sitting in the audience at that time. Now, we know that after that, 1963, he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. Well, he gave a speech prior to that, too, and he gave a speech in Oslo as well. He also kept protesting, and then they ended up, in 1965, they went to March on Selma. That's when you always hear all the time. There was a movie called Selma.
Yeah.
That's the when they were on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and that's the one that we have a certain unnamed congressman that always refers to it. And so, but that wasn't just King. That wasn't just the only thing. But see, King was making a turn at that point because that's the same year that Malcolm had gotten killed. King had got arrested and was in Birmingham, and there was a whole lot going on in Birmingham, too. And Malcolm had sent a message down there and said, if anything happens to Dr. King or any of his people, I'm coming down and we're going to handle it. Nothing happened to King. But we also know that within that year, Malcolm was killed, too.
Let me ask you this. You said Martin preached a lot of his sermons or speeches from the pulpit.
Yes.
Question. Since the onset of what happened with King, do you think there was a change in how these so-called pastor, preachers, deacons, whatever you want to call them now, have changed how they present things? Because they're not talking about things that are happening in our communities. They're not talking about things that are happening in our government. They're not talking about nothing.
Well, I will say this.
Except passing the plate in the building fund.
Well, not all. Some.
Well, not all. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
so I don't want to throw everybody,
Yeah.
all them.
Yeah.
If the shoe fits, you got to wear it.
Yeah.
So I'm not stereotyping all pastors, deacons, and some of the other
Right.
names that I called them into one category. They know who they are. And again, based off what you were saying, and a lot of King's messages were delivered during church.
Right.
So to speak. So now that we're not getting that same message, I was just,
He has a point.
Yes.
You know, he has a very strong
you know
point.
what I
I
mean?
agree with you. Yes.
So that's
You know what I think is happening is that, you know, we are not asking questions.
exactly.
You know, if I mean for any society to advance, you need to ask questions.
True.
So why is it? Why do you have to do this? Why do I have to do this? You know, so it's important for all of us to also accept the fact that whoever it is that we are talking about, to accept the fact that people want a clear understanding of why things are the way they are. I mean, for instance, I have never understood why you go to church and then you have to give your money. You know, I mean, it's becoming. When we were younger, I don't know about the United States, but growing up in Ghana, I mean, we had the traditional system, the conventional systems that the Europeans brought to us.
Right.
So we had the Catholics, we had the Presbyterians, we had the, you know, I was born in a Presbyterian church. And I remember every Sunday, my mother, whenever there was the time to do the collection, you know, we all put little pennies and stuff. And I don't think my mother gave too much money every now and then. But everything is changing now, you know, and I really don't know whether it was like that for you then.
Yeah. Well, I think related to that, and getting back to Martin Luther King's The Other America, I think King in his speech, and the reason why I love that speech, and Twala did a phenomenal job of transcribing the speech for us, and I just want to give a shout out to you because that's a very long speech. But in The Other America, we're talking about the part of the speech that really hits me most, and as a preacher, as you mentioned, was he talked about, we did sit-ins, we did protests, and now he's coming to recognize that we've got places that people can't even live in, slum housing. Second, we've got, you know, unsanitary living conditions. We can't get economic or jobs to even take care of ourselves. And so in this speech, the thing that hit home to me most was the fact that I felt like Malcolm felt like my ladder was leaning up against the wrong building. So his focus, and I read and took some time to prepare for the show, The Negro Problem, which was a consortium of authors, Paul Laurence Dunbar, where they're talking about this race issue again. This race issue has been plaguing us for years. We've had scholars discuss it. And Martin Luther King in the 60s is still trying to answer the question, what's the issue? So in order to ask the questions and investigate what you said, I went back and took a look at what they said. And one of the leaders, I can't think of his name in writing when I read The Negro Problem, but he said one of the problems is a people will never be respected without an economic base. And I think that Malcolm in that speech had understood exactly what that meant. We can talk all day long, but until you're created a substantial through businesses, through protecting your businesses, supporting your businesses and your community, it's going to be very difficult to really move a people from a position of being able to stand on their own.
I agree with you. I'm going to answer his question first, and then I think I could tie to that, and then we'll run right back here because it all blends in. You said the question about how at that time we were talking about how the preachers were using the pulpit to speak to the people, and they were speaking to the conditions of the people. Now, historically in this country, for black people, the church was the hub.
Yes.
If you wanted to know what was going on in government, if you wanted to know what was going on in your community, if you wanted to know what the next thing you need to do, it was the church. The church was
the 60s internet.
The church was where you got your personhood.
Yes.
Because you would be called boy all day long by the Caucasian folks during the weekday. You come in the church, you're deacon so-and-so.
Yes.
You call girl or auntie so-and-so, or you're by your first name by little children. And then on Sunday, you hear your sister so-and-so and head of the missionary society, whatever. So you got your personhood in church. So you got your dignity.
Your
that was the
respect.
one place where the hub was where you knew that you were being respected for the person you were. Now, the church was was integral part of civic rights, and even when back to slavery, they would sing call and response songs. That's how they would sing these church songs like wade in the water, wade in the water, wait, God's going to trouble the water. They were telling you where to go and what to do. So for us in this country, the church was our source. Now, in the 50s and 60s and even beyond that time, up until I would say maybe more toward the 80s maybe, churches were not afraid, or ministers were not afraid to speak to these social ills. But as society changed, our focus changed too. Churches became non-profit organizations.
Well, they
And
couldn't
so-
because of their
but,
status.
Right. But so in order to become
So,
a nonprofit organization,
yeah.
there's certain things
You cannot say.
You can't say
Right.
across the pulpit. So you couldn't
Right.
talk politics.
Exactly.
And so that kind of snuffed it. And then
Right.
we became
Who was the one that said, okay, if you become, because so many of them did, if you become a nonprofit, these are the things that you're going to cut out. Where did that injunction
The
or
IRS
that judgment?
the IRS
Oh,
list,
okay.
list, and then on top of that, by being a nonprofit, that protects you as tax status. And as people put money in a church, you want to be able to have that burden of taxation lifted off of you. The purpose is supposed to be so that the money could go farther for the people in the church. But what we have seen is that it became bigger churches, larger churches, bigger churches, larger churches, communities being dwarfed and the communities becoming neighborhoods. And I think what you're saying is that where's the activism from the pulpit back to the people?
Exactly.
Well, there's a whole lot, and that's part of it too.
Well,
And
that
then-
explains a whole lot of what's going on today in our churches. Whereas, like I said,
Let me ask you a question. What is the center of the black community now?
what is the center?
Yeah. See, like I said, at that time, that
Tupac.
was
That's what I mean. Okay, because you have to be 100, and to be 100, you have to be ratchet.
Well,
And that seems to be. I'm just
Yeah,
saying.
you're
I'm
right.
joking, but there's some reality within that joke. But
because
you
I
know,
think, and like I said with Martin Luther King, I know he was an intellectual. He wrote, you'll go in all the time looking at some of the speeches he wrote and his understanding of what was really happening
Yes.
to us. But I think Twyla, I've heard you speak on this a lot, and I think it's very well done, where you talk about galvanizing the sit-ins. All that came from where? The black
from
church.
the black church.
So a lot of the things that we were able to do were, whereas Malcolm was helped, had the history, like you said, in the black church. But one of the things I like to speak to is that it's so important for all of us to be a student of history. I always say there are a number of books. We got like Black Labor, White Wealth by Dr. Claude Anderson, and a Black history reader. And the reason why history is important is that, because people like to say, there's really not racism. There's institutional racism, because every time we start to make strides, because of the power that the black church had at that time, we're going to change the tax code. All of a sudden something in history gets changed, and when that change happens, then we're going to curb whatever progress you're making.
Yeah.
So we notice that, and that's why it's so important for us to be well-read, to read, to know, and to have leadership to know, so that the leaders can help guide our thinking. So, like you said, instead of listening, and I like Tupac, but instead of looking, because he had some consciousness than some of it. And rap, I always say, is an example of a billion-dollar business. And that's what Martin Luther King was talking about. We're building these businesses, but we're not getting any of those dollars, because it's moving out of our communities.
Yeah, well, they changed the game, and
Yes.
as you said, and you know something, again, the tactics and the means that we used back then in the 60s to march which was effective then.
Yes.
Because it wasn't
They're
just
not-
the only thing they were doing.
Yeah,
That's the thing.
well, that's true, but that's not working in today's society.
Yes.
I'm going to take you back to
You-
67
you
real
know what I
quick,
mean?
though. I'm going to jump back to 67 real quick because I have a question that is right directly to Francis. Because in 67, we had a whole lot of unrest remember the riots in the Huff in Cleveland in
Yeah.
67?
Yeah.
Tore it up. Now, our city had a riot the following year. Tore the whole
Worcester?
community up. Yes. Now, 67 also, when we had Detroit, you had riots in Chicago as well. And that's where we got the phrase, H. Rap Brown coined this phrase. Folks don't know this. Burn, baby, burn.
Burn, baby, burn.
Yeah.
So, and what King was talking about at that time, he said that riots are the direct result of people who feel like they can't be heard.
Wow.
And so he said that we, instead of attacking the people who are participating in the riots, let's attack the issues that they are addressing. Now, I noticed when we were doing all these things, I noticed that in 67 there was a civil war in Sudan, there was a civil war in Nigeria and Chad. Kenya was going through a war. There were riots at the soccer match in Turkey. Greece had a military coup. And when I'm looking at all these things, I also noticed that Ghana was going through its own. So when people say, why weren't our rest of the diaspora going helping? Well, my gosh, everybody was going through a civil war, a war of independence or something. So what I wanted is to find out what was going on in Ghana or what led up. I know that we have a relationship to Ghana that goes deeper than just the plantation and the slave trade. Our relationship with you is
so
rich.
first of all, Ghana had a relationship with Martin Luther King because in 1957, during the struggle for independence, Kwame Nkrumah developed a relationship with him, and he actually invited him to come to Ghana for the independence. But in Nkrumah's letter to him, he says, well, even though I really wish I could have paid for your trip to Ghana, we were under, well, he couldn't afford to buy a ticket for Martin Luther King to come. But it was a nice worded letter, you can find it online. But he found a way around it, and he came. So he was one of the guests at our independence. So Ghana has always had a relationship with Martin Luther King. Growing up, I remember, faintly something that we had to study in school about Martin Luther King, and but I think we were more the African American culture that influenced us most was the music. The music and the fashion. So way back from the mid-60s, everybody wanted to dress like, we used to call them the Afro-Americans. Do you know that's the way you were called?
Afro.
Yeah.
Yes, we
Afro.
used to, so growing up, we used to call them Afro-Americans.
We call ourselves that too for
Yeah.
a minute.
Yeah.
And I remember we watched a lot of the few black shows like Julia.
Oh, yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah, Julia. We watched Julia in Ghana,
Oh.
and a couple of them. So there was, but it was the music, from Isaac Hayes to Curtis Mayfield then it comes later on Funkadelic and all the but it was the music. I personally, and I know a lot of the people I grew up with, had this bond with America because of the fashion. Did you guys? Well, of course. You wore bell bottoms.
Oh,
in the-
well,
You know something too, Francis.
pants,
Now, okay, during that time
these.
period, dashikis.
Yes.
Because I had me a couple of them.
What was that?
It's
The tie-dye and after
Yeah,
that.
you're right.
You know, is it the same thing? I mean, it was how do you explain it?
Like Kente cloth
Yes,
material.
yeah,
I see.
material.
Yeah,
it
the
was a
tie and
dashiki.
dye thing,
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, you
We
know,
had- those were cool. Yes.
yeah,
Really.
yes, exactly. So again, see, we got bits and pieces of what was going on there,
Yeah.
and I guess we was kind of embracing our blackness, because, you know, say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud.
proud, yeah.
And so
James
folks
Brown.
were standing up,
Yeah.
you know, and they got the conchs or the process out the hair and began wearing the big fros, and we embraced our blackness. I think that's when we first became black,
Yeah.
We
Yeah, because
guess.
we used to be colored.
because we used to be colored.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Now,
So, so
I remember
you
going
see,
to Color Girl.
around that time, I mean, we were Africa, not just Africa. It was like you said, all over the world. You know, all people. There was an awakening.
An awakening.
People wanted to. So in Ghana, in Ghana, we were one of the first. We were the first country in sub-Saharan Africa to gain independence. You know, and so because of that, we kind of led the way for a lot of the other countries. You know, was Secretary of Guinea, and then you know, Nigeria. All these leaders, kind of even
Rhodesia.
yes. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, Mugabe lived in Ghana for a long time.
Yes.
You know, Ghana was the place
I've
to
studied
be.
him. A great
You
man.
know, Maya Angelou lived in Ghana for a long
Yes.
time.
Yeah.
Malcolm was in Ghana. You know, Nkrumah was really powerful. He's one of the leaders that I think if African Americans don't know, they ought to know about him.
Yes.
You know, he was very powerful, very successful. He was smarter than most of the guys, and he built Ghana to be one. Yes, we were the center of where everybody admired Ghana because we had everything, you know, happening nicely for us until, of course, in 1966.
Tell us what happened in
Well,
66.
he was overthrown. He was kicked out.
I tell you what, we'll find out after the break.
Break.
We're going more into that. Don't you go anywhere. Don't touch that dial. You stick around for a long
Call,
while.
comment.
Before our break, we had Francis, who was going to give us the concluding part to what was going on. He said, then 66.
Yeah.
So we're on a seat hinging on 66.
Yeah, so in 1966, there was a coup in Ghana. The military took over, and Nkrumah was had gone abroad, you know, and then things, you know, happened, and there was a coup, you know. So for me and for most people, they feel that things were going south, you know, things were not going well. And I remember seeing as a kid, you know, I saw a lot of cartoons and very nasty things said about Nkrumah at the time. You know, that he was, he had become a dictator and so on and so forth. You know, but later on, we, you know, of studying Nkrumah's legacy, we realized that he was really a great man, you know, and he did a lot of things. He had put a lot of things in place for the country to develop, you know. So again, the relationship between the African American struggle at the time and the black struggle in Africa, they were working together. You know, they found ways to communicate and meet and share ideas and ideologies and so on and so forth.
So first here, y'all unified.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that's today's America's biggest fear. And that's why there's so much incorporated. And you say, not just America, but worldwide, they always want to keep that foot on our necks. So again, there's a reason and a purpose behind it, because, see, they saw the strength in numbers. This is why, where my mirror at? We need you, because we want to unify and build a strength. And I want to throw this in right quick, not to cut you off now. They just had a gathering of all the women all over the country for whatever women's rights and things of that nature. So now they are power source. I say this again, the
LGBTQI.
Those people came together. You know, as one, and they became a power. Ghana became a power through unification, and so again, the powers that be want to keep this separation.
But here's the thing that King was talking about in '67, and mind you, like I said, and like we've reiterated, this speech was said. He ran through '67 and '68, and this was the message he wouldn't move from. He said the biggest problem. He's talked about unemployment, education, and housing. But he said before he got to that the premise for all these problems was the race issue that was never addressed in America. You had the Civil Rights Act, you had the Voting Act, and like he said, those things didn't go far enough because we have a government that feels comfortable putting things in place on paper, but never enforcing them in reality. So that was the thing that King was talking about was race. Now, we heard during the Obama era and during his candidacy that we were in post-racial. Did you hear what I said? Post means after. That's Latin. Racial. I looked in the dictionary and found out that definition will never occur because there's always going to be someone who oppresses someone because of their race. Now, in this speech, I want you all to focus on this a minute. He talked about the unemployment, the rise in unemployment. He said that there are Negro men that looking for jobs and aren't there, and the unemployment gap was getting wider and wider. Does that sound familiar? Does it sound familiar?
Exactly.
And I think Dr. Claude Anderson, I know when he talks about, not so much here, but in Power Economics, he really goes into detail about economically, there's no difference between where we are now than where we were like a few 100 years. Yeah. And that's a scary thing.
That head start off of that black labor, they keep moving forward, and we're moving further back. You know, I don't want to say we're not as well. The situation creates itself to whereas we're not as hungry. We want that quick fix. You know what I mean? Just for instance, the fight game we saw
Broner versus
Pacquiao
versus
Broner. And I was listening to them, and anything that they have achieved, they had to work for it. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so now, yes, I want my children to do a little better than I did, and we all do. But you know something, we kind of we tend to spoil them a little bit, or maybe even a lot. But we spoil them to the point they want that instant gratification. They don't want to put in the time now that it takes
we call
in
it
order
entitled.
to achieve. Yes.
Entitled.
So that entitlement, they think that, okay, well, shoot, you did the work, so I'm going to get all the wealth. And again, we did the work, and they have achieved all the wealth, and to the point now they've incorporated a system to whereas we're not being included in this wealth-making process for my family or whatnot. So again, now...
Well, now, see, I would disagree with you. And
no, you
okay. What I
it's
do
America.
know, and I say, is that we are consumers to the tune of $1.7 trillion. We represent, as black people today, a 16th country. This is based on census data.
How much is that is black dollars?
Okay, now the problem for us is we don't, economics is the name of the game. I don't care, you can call it race, we're talking race here, but we as a people, until we start looking at the economic piece, I think Damien said it on our last show about green is the thing that matters to most people. And until we get that piece down, and we're looking in the back mirror, we should be looking in that rear view mirror just to figure out what we can do differently, because what we've done hasn't worked to date.
I agree.
So now, we only spend, of that 1.7 trillion, that's a lot of money. That's hair, that's fingernails, that's the $250 tennis.
The bling.
That's the bling, that's all of that. 3% of it goes back into our community.
And it really
Only
goes to our
3%.
community, because our communities, we don't even have communities anymore.
Yeah.
We got neighborhoods.
Yes, yes.
And that's the reality. We
Yes.
have neighborhoods. When you talk about the employment gap, the numbers don't tell the truth, because it only represents people who are actually actively looking and reporting to the Bureau.
And then the Bureau of Labor Statistics
Only reflects those who are actually reporting.
Exactly.
And if you don't report, and after so long, people don't report because you fall off, you're not going to get paid anyway, and that's just it.
Right.
But these are the same conditions that we found ourselves in '67.
Yeah.
The
So nothing has
same.
changed.
And we,
But-
our money, see, but the thing about it back then that I can say compared to now, I knew who was going to pick up the laundry in our neighborhood. Name him Mr. Parms. He had a truck. He had a laundromat, cleaners. He would go through our neighborhood and pick up. I remember giving him my granny's clothes, and then sometimes he'd come back. Well, what he came back through, and if I didn't have the cash, I'd have a little slip of paper, and he would give me the little bill, and I would give it to my granny. So they handled their little particulars. I remember the black man who owned Mr. Bill, who had a store on Howe, and he had a little corner store. Going to that corner store, you didn't have any money. You took a slip that your mama or somebody wrote and said,
Right.
and then
Oh,
they said, okay.
yeah.
So you went on, you did your little shopping, and that was it.
Yeah.
What we did was, when those black people needed their money, we got this shimmy sham flam game, and we stopped paying them on time. Now, a black vendor cannot afford not to get their money on time. That's the bottom line. Black vendors, we got to get our money on time. We don't have that cushion, that buffer. Black people did black people in on that, and I can tell you that's a fact. So those stores closed up. We didn't have the capital. We weren't getting the loans to reopen those stores, and that is systemic racism all day, every day. Because you still have the question, how does a person come from somewhere, doesn't have anything, gets a loan with no credit history, and then get back in your neighborhood? So then what happens is that, I'm going to say, in the black communities and our black neighborhoods, Palestinians and people of Middle Eastern descent end up buying a lot of getting those stores. People are scared. I'm telling you, I'm just telling you the truth. Black people don't want to not pay that person because they're scared that Mahmoud or somebody, because of the stereotype they already see. See, we all deal with stereotypes. Yeah. You see, let's just be real.
So, right now, I've heard this thing for years, they say black people are always whining and complaining about their situation and how the white man has been horrible to us and so on and so forth. And what is the way forward? I mean, what do you think if the four of us decided to, come up with a strategy, a plan, where we will turn this negative whining, complaining thing into something that will actually bring change?
Well, I'd like to start off because I'm all about solutions. First of all, I think that we got a far ahead in life because of God, number one. We had a strong faith, Christian-based faith in Christ. And that was, as you mentioned in prior sessions, before we got over here, we were a religious people.
Yes.
We were a spiritual people, spiritual, yeah. But we believed in God. We had a firm, in my opinion, value system. And if you don't have a firm foundational value system, it's very difficult to move forward in life. That's number one. Number two is your family. I've made it. I'm sitting here today because I'm standing on the shoulders of some very great women and men. And we've got to recognize that we can't treat our families any kind of way because they're the first source of helping us to the next level.
But now, where's our families today? What do we see the dynamic of the definition of family when we were growing up is different than the definition of family today.
Right.
So,
well,
how does that translate?
I know when I was growing up, what was the first thing you learned about a family? The nuclear family. Mom, dad, children. But guess who made the biggest impact on me and you? Who were they? My grandmother, great-grandparents. Those are the people who gave us what? Wisdom and understanding and knowledge. And from that, we were able to move on. So once you have God, family, and then you can then spread it out to your community. And I'm a big believer. I'm a business owner. Sean is a business owner. Twala is a business owner. Francis is a business owner. We've got to own our businesses and support. And Dr. Claude Anderson talks about this at length. And we've got to, his biggest point to me that changed my thinking was, stay in your communities and clean your trash up. Start investing in where you live. Make a difference in where you live. And to me, if we just do those few things, getting those right, and everybody being on board and on the same path, and leadership is important. And I think it was called the Talented. The Talented, what, 10?
Talented 10. That was
10.
W.B. Du Bois.
You want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's critical for leadership, black leadership.
I think, I understood what he was talking about. I'm going to go back to what you're talking about in investing or with some solution. One, I do want to say that in the speech, King said something that was so poignant to me. There was a gentleman who was telling him the very same thing he had in his travels about, why are you all complaining? Why do you all always do? Why don't you all pick yourselves up by your bootstraps? Well, King said, we don't have the boots. So it wasn't like self-determinism isn't our problem. Part of it is that we are at an impasse because we have not received that 400-plus year head start. And that is something that the United States has to resolve. That doesn't mean that we stay wallowed in our mire in the meantime, but that is the stain that has to be resolved. So if you do check us out next week, John Cheeks from USCRIA, which is United States Citizens Initiative Recovery Act, will be in here talking about recovery and reparations. And by the end of the show, we'll go more into detail with that, because that does have to be. When you got I run against one of my children when they're younger. We were running a 100-yard dash. I gave my child an over 50-yard head start, and I still beat her. And I was messing around because when he said go, I didn't even start then. I was laughing like, okay, I guess I go now. So she had this head start. But had it been me having that head start, she would have beat me. She wouldn't have caught me. You see what I mean? So we still are trying to catch up in that regard, because race and the systemic racism we have is an issue. But just because we know that's the issue, inherently, we as black people need to do what Malcolm said in '64. Malcolm made a speech called The Ballot or the Bullet. When you listen to that speech, it sounds like Malcolm standing outside their door or talking today, which is so frustrating to me, because what he said was, you're Christians, you're Christian ministers. I'm a Muslim minister. But he said, put your God in your closet. Some people took offense to that. Oh, he said, no, he was right. Put your God in your closet. Worship your God. But right now, we don't need to talk about our divisions, the things that divide us. We need to come together about what unites us. And we have this one issue. economics. Economics, economics. There should be no reason why I shouldn't seek out a black person first for a service. I don't care. It might cost me a little more. Now, I've gotten burnt by some black folks. I tell you, too. That's true. But I've gotten burnt by Caucasian folks, too, and everybody else, too. So, I mean, but if you don't support your own, who do you think is going to support your own? So we really do have to look at, in our neighborhoods, we don't have communities because we don't own the property. We don't own the stores. We don't own the wares. We allow ourselves to be treated a certain way. We do. Someone wear the pants hanging down to my style, not style, stupid.
Right.
Bottom
And
line.
we take our
Girls
dollars
wearing
out
clothes
of the
that
community.
are inappropriately attired clothes, and you get upset because somebody come at you and pull up on you wrong. Okay, so when we come back on the opposite side, we're going to talk about how these dollars, how we put these dollars together, so we can actually revamp our neighborhoods into communities, because we're way past due. Hit it. Don't leave.
Okay, and as you can see, we're back with the poetess Miriam Whitehead Bryce, and we're always happy to have her around. In addition to that, we want to say that you can pick up Miriam's book on Amazon.com and also Barnes & Noble. So we want you to support her. Like I said, I want to make sure that we purchase her book. She's also available for speaking engagements and whatnot. But I always like to talk to Miriam because I think she's a free thinker. She's always interesting and, more importantly, funny. So anyway, she has a few questions for us.
Yes, I wanted to know, when did we go from indentured servants to slaves?
Very good question.
I'll start off. You know something, that's a European thing. Now, when they were over there, and we talked about this earlier, when they were over there was no slaves, there were classes. You know, you had the rich and the poor, the serfs.
Serfs.
The serfs, yeah. Y'all remember the serfs back in school, right? So there were different classes. And so they weren't called slaves, but they were called serfs. So when they got tired of serving, they decided to come to another place. Now, none of those people of class came over on the boat ride, did they? No, the serfs came over. Now, when the serfs came over there, they're in a new land. Well, how are we going to survive? So the indigenous people taught them how to survive in the land. So now that they know how to survive in the land, well, who's going to build our homes and our houses and our businesses and this? So, let's go get us some more serfs. So they go to the African countries to get them serfs, but they didn't want to use the same name, so they just called them slaves. You know what I mean? I mean, that's just my opinion. So, but again, so they called them slaves, and of course now they took them same European ideas and traits and brought them over to perpetrate them on another group of people.
Okay.
In a book called the Bible, they have servants and had slavery too. But the slave institutions that were of old were nowhere near the slave institution in this country. This country is the only time in history where the slave servitude was based solely upon the color of your skin. Blacks were here on this continent. We were back here in 3000 BC. We were traders. And you have to understand, too, that the continents were all united at one time, too. So we know that tectonic plates shift and move, and we have all these continents separate. But blacks were here before the Pilgrims got here. Blacks were here when the Pilgrims got here. Blacks didn't depend on the Pilgrims or any part of England to get them here. Our whole indentured servant, those that were in England that came as indentured servants, supposed to be here for 7 years, and in the 7th year, you're supposed to be given freedom.
Released,
the same thing that you find if you look at this book called the Bible, the Old Testament, the same thing too. There was a young man named Jacob or Yaqub, 7 years. He was supposed to be freed, and he was supposed to get the one wife, but he ended up getting the first one. He had to do 7 more years.
Yes,
See, so
yes,
that was where that 7-year mark came for indentured servitude. But now, and we'll talk about this more. This is it's a show by itself, because I really want us to really get to the meat of it. The Catholic Church is the impetus of why we got slavery in this country, why the indentured servitude ended up being slavery, because it was the Pope that signed this thing called the Papal Bull. It's the Papal Bulls, Papal, Bull. Their edicts. And what they did was they said to the Portuguese back in the 1400s, it's okay to go off the coast of Africa to take these Negro savages and enslave them. You see, and then in the 1500s, there were Papal Bulls all along, and then they were and the Spaniards did the same thing. So that's how it started for us in this country. Because up until that point in time, yes, it was a servitude, an indenture type of, and what it was that someone paid for your voyage, and then you worked back the work off for them. We fortunately have a live studio audience today, so.
Yeah, before we get to that, they were civilized people. But by changing that narrative, by calling them savages, that made it okay, because they were a thriving civilization.
They were civil, and I don't want to go too far into that today, but they did have Now, there are always going to be conflicts between people. I don't care, groups of people, tribes of people are always going to, and there was slavery, but it was not slavery as the institution that we have in this country.
What it came
And
to be.
in those other countries, their slavery did not include separating you from your family,
Rape.
didn't include raping you. It was just that you were indebted to this person. You could actually travel and go from one place to the next place. They provided housing for you. They provided clothing for you. They even gave you some sort of pittance too. You see, so it's a whole. So when you hear people say other groups have been enslaved, squash them real quick. Only
Real
this
quick.
country, real quick. Only this country had an institution of slavery that was based solely upon the color of your skin, separated you from families, raped men and women, beat you, took people from lands where languages they didn't know, cultures they didn't know. So what could they do when they were enslaved here? They even enslaved free blacks that were here too. That's like I said, I have to come back down.
Right.
Different show.
Yeah, yeah,
Sister
another show.
Soldiers.
Different show.
She don't went Angela Davis on
Yeah,
the show.
yeah.
Okay, that's another show.
Speaking of Angela Davis, real quick, update on the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, which I laugh when I try to even say that name now. Angela Davis was finally told why. She wasn't told directly from them. The CEO, Angela Taylor, Miss Taylor, you're a coward. I'm telling you, you're a coward. If you're looking at me, you're a coward. Somebody need to send a message, you're a coward. You still refuse when all the news outlets have asked you directly to say why. You can't be mute on such an open subject. You need to say something. And the more you stay silent, the more it makes things fester. But Angela Davis did get the word that the reason why is because of her long-standing support of the people in Palestine. And I found it interesting, she said that her very freedom, her very life, she owes to the community of advocates worldwide. So why would she just signal that she's only for one group of people, one type of people?
Right, and I think that points to the very last point that Martin Luther King made. One of his, my favorite quote of his is, "Injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere."
That's right.
Very
I
good.
agree.
Okay.
Live audience.
Yeah,
Live
okay,
audience.
yeah.
Live audience. Question. There's a young lady who is, she's a high school student. What is your question or comment for us? First of all, tell us your first name.
My name is Jaira.
How old are you, Jaira? Hi.
I am 16.
Welcome.
Welcome
Jaira.
to the
Yeah. We want you young cats involved.
Yes.
And girls,
Yes.
kitties.
So the question that's raised is, how do the dilemmas that Martin talked about in 1967 affect us today? And one of the ways that they affect us today is like through education and through poverty and housing and jobs. The cycle of poverty doesn't allow us to make the money that we need to equip us correctly in education. So that's one way that it affects us.
Excuse me, I have a question for you. When you say education, what is it about education that keeps a young black male, female, or people who are financially repressed, because we're talking in the ecclesia, what hurts compared to an education? Tell me this. In your school, give me an example, or give us an example of someone who has and someone who doesn't have something.
Well, my family always makes sure is that I am equipped for the needs of school. So in my class, in my math class, everybody doesn't have a calculator in my class. The only person that has a calculator in my class is me. And we need those calculators to do our work. And the teacher has to provide us with the calculators, which it really sucks to me. We need those, to continue with our work.
Okay.
So,
And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you can continue.
I said that the main focus with the speech that Martin Luther King gave was to give us our recovery for our free labor that we did. We not only did free labor, we did more than just free labor. We were their slaves. We did clothe their children. We took care of their kids, and we also we built America. So we did a lot for the white supremacists. We did a lot for them. And I feel like, well, not I feel like, but Martin, he tried to make that the main point was he wanted the Caucasian people to do right by us, not because they wanted to. He wanted them to do right by us, not because we said something, but because it's in their heart to do right by us. Mm-hmm. They are in debt to us because of all the things that we did for them. We were beat by them, enslaved, and our children got hurt because of them. We did so much for them, but this is the payment that we get for everything that we did for them. And that's what Martin was trying to pinpoint. He was trying to also pinpoint that racism is very real, that it was not, he didn't want everybody to cover it up. He didn't want everybody to put it to the side, not just Caucasian people, but the black people too, because the Caucasian people were being two-faced. They were saying, oh, we're for you, but they weren't really showing it because actions, speak louder than words. But Martin, he pinpointed that he wanted everybody to know that racism was very real. It was he wanted to make sure that it was known and not to keep it under the rug, because it needed to be said, because they put so much money into other things, but they don't put it onto what needs to be put it onto. They have money to have a man walk on the moon. That's what Martin said, but they don't have money to, help us with our income and help us with us. He said that it's easier to integrate a lunch counter than it is to guarantee a livable income and a job and a solid, good job. He said it's easier to guarantee the right to vote than it is to guarantee the right to live in sanitary, decent homes and housing conditions, which is important, and it is very sad.
Wow. Jara,
that was good.
Let me ask you a question as a young person. With how things, and through studying your history and you knowing what was going on, as a young person, what would you do to change it for young kids today? Something that they can do to help bring about change?
I would encourage them in their studies, because I feel like on the down low, not on the down low, like on the down low, but not on the down low, it's not wanted for us to succeed as young black people. It's not wanted for us to succeed. We spend too much time. We see so many black people in jail and not enough of them in school and in books. A lot of them on the streets and not enough of them at home studying. So that's for one, because we have a lot of black children growing up too fast because of the number of jobs. We don't have a lot of jobs, or we don't have a lot of money, so we always hear these stories about how kids in school always have to deal with problems at home. So of course we would encourage education and a lot of activity, try to get out there, because our generation is the future. And
absolutely.
For them to succeed in the future, we need to know about our past and our history, and we need to learn how to learn from that history, because a lot of us are failing right now. Not too long ago, we were talking about a subject in school about how our generation is today, and to change it, we need to invest in education first and foremost.
Another question, quick question. We as adults, do you think we failed you guys? Is there a lack of hope? Because you expect us to take care of you, and we are, and a lot of parents aren't doing what they're supposed to do as far as a child is concerned. Whereas you have to grow up 15, 16 or younger, and you have to take care of the other siblings. And you're thrusted in a role, that you're not prepared for. So I just want to ask you that question.
Yes, I think so. I think they do, in a way, you kind of have failed us.
Okay.
Wow.
Fair answer.
Well,
Thank you so much.
Wow.
That was beautiful.
Wow.
And so now we're going to have two things happen real quick before we sign off. One is Miriam is going to read her wonderful poem, and then we're going to have Twala give us a couple minutes to walk the walk and head on out.
All right, this is called The Journey of We. The Lord blew breath into shades of clay as he formed we, with the strength to move mountains, with thoughts to achieve any dream. He influenced we to thrive past grass and stone, groomed to believe that there was nothing that could be conquered. We were styled with intelligent, with a decadent flavor of unique. Then we were broken for gold, sold for weapons, beaten because of knowledge, and taught to be less than the kings and queens we were birthed to be. We were encouraged by the drums and the rhythms of our spirit. We pressed on even though our self-esteem was challenged with dismemberment. We were gathered, clustered, and frustrated by proprietors' hate. With an indwelling of love, still beating freedom in our hearts, loving strong inwardly, but outwardly appearing unnatural. We, daughters and sons, were raped, roped, and bound. Still the rhythms of our spirit were passed down with everlasting shades of we, with ceaseless blendings of ideas, creations, and celebrations. We were mitigated to be immigrated, then violated to be disassociated, yet still keeping the banner of prayer for justice only known by we. We were called to journey through the desolate channels, canals, and lower bowels of muck, only to rise through segregation because of an obligation to the future. We rose through depression and oppression because of an obligation to the future. We rise through the fogs of isolation because of an obligation to the future, just to ascend into greatness because of an obligation to the future. We, whose hearts beat to a Caribbean scent, to a seemingly diagnostic America whose amnesia is suitable when it comes to accountability. We beat the drum. We amalgamate the rhythm and the drum. We are the drum.
Woo, 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 woo. Beautiful, Miriam.
Wonderful, wonderful,
Wonderful.
Absolutely
Yes,
beautiful.
Give
yes,
information
yes,
again
yes,
on
yes.
where they can pick up Miriam.
And Miriam, we can pick up Miriam's book on Amazon.com.
And Barnes and Noble.
Barnes and Noble.
It's called And I Don't Surrender to Stigmas and Judgments.
Amen.
Very good.
Wonderful title.
Very
Wonderful
good.
So,
title.
Twila, you're going to take us out with Walk the Walk.
Yes. First, I want to close up about King. Some of you all don't know that there was a lawsuit that was settled, and that it said that
very
the
good.
United States had colluded in the assassination of Dr. King. 8 December 1999, they said that this happened, and they awarded the King family a financial amount, and it was not millions, not thousands, but the court determined that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's life was worth $100.
Well, I'm mad about that.
$100. So I want you to do some more education and reading on that, of course, also. Pick up this book anywhere you can. This is a friend of our, if this is a friend of mine, Dr. Claude Anderson, because we're going to have him on in the spring here. Black Labor, White Wealth. Phenomenal read. Phenomenal read. You go to harvardinstitute.org for that, or Black Reader. There's all kinds of material because we need to be more educated, more informed. Now, walking off, what can you do? So, what can I do? Well, a couple things. I need you to go to look at the D.C. Compensation Emancipation Act. D.C. Compensation Emancipation Act of 1862, because that's the law that gave the owners of slaves in D.C. reparations up to $300 they were paid for the slaves they had to free. So you need to read about that because our guest next week is going to be Mr. John Cheeks from the United States Citizens Recovery Initiative Act. You can find them at uscria.com. But what can you do besides that? These blocks, real quick. Let me see them. Look at your block. Put them up. Everybody got a block? Put a block. Put up these blocks. Put up the blocks. Where's your block? Get a block. Put a block. Listen.
We can share a block. See, you know something? We can share.
No. Miriam got a block by herself. Teresa has a block. Sean has a block. Francis has a block. our studio audience have blocks too. This block by itself does nothing. Take your blocks and put your blocks together. What did you do?
Bill.
We have a tower.
You're going up higher. You're reaching higher. So that's what you need to do in your community. You need to put your blocks together. The speech was very short. It's 45-minute speech. We couldn't get it all done in an hour. You can't. Go back and listen to that speech again, and then get together in your neighborhood. Get together with your next door neighbor. Get together and just sit down and pull out, what one thing can I address? What one thing can I address? Don't forget, hit the like button, hit the share button, leave your comments. ConnectToTheBridge.com on our website. Connect to the Bridge on YouTube. Connect to the Bridge on Instagram. Connect to the Bridge on Facebook.
Yes.
And that's it for this week.
One more thing. Don't believe the hype. Don't let his story be your history.
Ron, take us home.